Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the show. We are welcoming back the great Professor Peter Van Toor, and a lot of people are extremely excited to hear what he has to say about his new Cotumacci release that he has released now with Westmans, and we are going to spend the entire episode talking about his Regole and Cotumacci's the new book that Professor Van Toor has recently released. So, Professor Van Toor, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the privilege.
It's great, and you answer so many questions that we have and the community has with such precision, such scholarly precision. And again, we're going to talk about this wonderful book. Let me just bring it up on the screen here where people can find it. So this is the let me put the share up here. Okay, so the Regule, and these are the Thorabase or Partimento exercises. And this is from an autograph, right? So looking here at the blurb here, it says, a recently identified autograph of Cotumacci's complete exercises. So that's quite a find.
Yeah. Yes, I was lucky to identify his handwriting. In most cases, the librarians have written originale or autograph on the front page, but that is not the case in this one. So that's why it is easy to overlook that this is actually an autograph. But it is an autograph. I compared it with several other autographs by Cotumacci, so I'm completely sure about it.
Is it very new? Like we've never had something like this before?
Yes, it's the only complete autograph of Cotumacci. So all the lessons are there, the 50 lessons, and all the 75 partimenti. So it is a complete transcription. And the funny thing is that there are almost no mistakes. So I found one or two small things, but it is almost perfect.
That's incredible.
So,
wow.
I mean, he knew what he was doing when he wrote this.
Okay, so I think we should why don't we have a little bit of an introduction to Carlo Cotumacci? So 1709 to 1785. Who was he? Who was his teacher? Who were his teachers? And what was his career like?
Yeah, so he is mostly known as a pedagogue, although he was actively working as a composer, mainly of church music, and he was working as an organist in Naples. So he was one of the great organists in 18th century Naples. The English traveler and commentator Charles Burney met Cotumacci in his house in Naples in 1770, and he tells a little bit about. He says maybe half a page of information about Cotumacci, and some of the things he tells us is that he showed Burney his complete lessons for keyboard improvisation, so the partimenti, and also his book on counterpoint. The book on counterpoint is today missing, although I think I have identified a few pages from it in the conservatory library in Liège in Belgium. But is today mostly known as pedagogue, and he had the privilege to succeed Francesco Durante at the Onofrio Conservatory in 1755. When Durante died, there were two primo maestri, Dol and Cotumacci. So these two maestri worked together. And
I,
of these,
yeah.
of these two, Cotumacci was the one who was the more old-fashioned one. So he was schooled in old counterpoint. It's also something that what Bernie tells us.
So who are his teachers?
Yeah. So Bernie says also that he had learned music from Alessandro Scarlatti. Now, this is something that hasn't been verified in any other information. So we only have this information from Bernie, but I don't think there are reasons to doubt this because he was in direct contact with Cotumacci. So I think we can be pretty sure that he studied, although he must have been very young. So maybe he was 10 years of age or something like that when he had lessons from Scarlatti.
Just as a side question, was Bernie a very accurate historian? Was he is he a very trusted source?
Yeah, so he was very accurate, and he traveled a lot, and he seems to have been very well informed about Naples. So the information about Naples is fascinatingly correct, I would say. It's also interesting to see that Bernie knew exactly at what day you should come to Naples, because he comes like the 15th of October when the big festival of the conservatory started. That was the time when Bernie arrived. So he knew exactly what to expect in Naples. So he was an insider.
Now, Scarlatti, I was recently reading a biography of Handel, and it says in the biography, Scarlatti, Alessandro Scarlatti, is a great model on which Handel uh, drew his style from and everything. It, so Scarlatti, I know there's questions about him being like the founder of the Neapolitan school, and what kind of teacher was he like? Do we have what are his? You're really good at judging the partimenti and the counterpoint. What's is he very old style, or what? How would you judge Alessandro Scarlatti?
Yeah, so there are two collections of his partimenti. We don't know very much about his teaching, but um, especially the Hamburg Codex. I think it is like over 200 uh, pieces of music. Quite complicated, I would say, and the counterpoint is really good. He seems to have been a person who wrote a lot. I mean, he wrote so many cantatas and such a lot of music, um, and that seems the case for his partimenti too. He was always composing, it seems. But I would say he
Was
was
he a good
very
keyboard
important
player?
as a source.
Was he a good keyboard player? Was he known
Yeah,
for being?
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, the level of these pieces is really high, and I think he was a great inspiration for Durante and for Leo. Um,
So if
so yes.
Cotumacci studied with him, was that the only teacher? Do we have any other sources of possible teachers, or that's all we have?
No, he studied at the conservatories. I don't know exactly who his teachers were, but since he was born in 1709, uh, we may expect that he must have studied in at a very good period when the level of counterpoint was really good in the 1720s, early 30s maybe. So I would say that if I would choose, if I would be able to go back to Naples and place myself into the historical milieu, I would choose the 1720s or 30s or maybe 40s. That would be the perfect time to study these things.
Now we know Fenaroli had famous students, Cimarosa. Did Cotumacci have famous pupils?
Yeah, we don't know a lot about. He did not have the same reputation as his teacher or his predecessor Durante. Durante had, of course, an enormous reputation all over Europe. That was not the case with Cotumacci, but certainly he had good students.
Right.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
now here's the question. Well, there's a few really. I think I like to ask the question, "What is Partimento?" a lot, even though it just to get different sides to it. You know, it's an intriguing question that we there's Basso Seguente, there's all things. Is Partimento, because really that's the name that everyone is using now. It's a very exciting term. And I think I was talking to your colleague, Professor Matteo Massori, and he has a good explanation and gives some background on that. But why don't I put the question to you again? You know, what is Partimento? What is it used for? I think people get this idea that it's to teach you to be a composer, or is it multifactorial? Does it have other aspects to it that's part of the training?
Yeah, so I would say that Partimento should be understood in the educational milieu um, of the Neapolitan conservatories. It was one of the materials that were given to the students to become a musician. The other materials where we can study what they did are the solfeggi, so the pieces they received in the singing lessons, and also the counterpoint notebooks. And it seems that the partimenti and the counterpoint notebooks are closely related. So it seems that partimento and counterpoint is more or less a unity. So what you start in partimento is continued in written studies when you have taken your exam in partimento. So it is a preliminary phase in learning the art of counterpoint. And it's also interesting to know that the subject was called contrappunto pratico, and so practical counterpoint, um, which was not the same as theoretical counterpoint, which was more old-fashioned, where you study like the mathematics and proportions and that kind of stuff. Here it is more like learning by doing. So the teacher plays and the student imitates and varies the exercises, and you learn to speak the language, so to speak. And I think this is what attracts modern players more than anything else, that um, you can learn the art of counterpoint by listening to good examples, and a teacher can play realizations of simple exercises such as cadences and scales. Often they were in three part style rather than in 4-part style, so it's easier to imitate the music than what is the case with, let's say, Bach chorales or something, where it is very difficult to hear the difference between an alto and a tenor voice. Especially if you play it on an organ or a keyboard instrument, it's sometimes the voices even cross, and it's really difficult to imitate it by ear. But Partimento is more like a 3-part, like trio sonata style. It's more the Italian Corelli style that is played. So the figures are more expressing the linearity of
Right.
like Baroque music.
Right. Can
And yeah.
I was going to ask you about basso continuo in relation to learning partimento. So, like Gasparini has a very famous treatise on accompaniment, and so do these students learn chords? I know we have the anecdote of Fenaroli making the students play 10 notes at a time, something like a large big big chords. Is that partimento and basso continuo at the same time, or do they learn chordal playing in ensembles early?
Yeah, so it's interesting that in the Bolognese tradition, it is very difficult to find the word partimento at all. So it seems to be a, a word that is mostly connected with Naples, although the word partimento does appear after 1800 in Bologna too. So there has been a dissemination of partimento pedagogy to other cities, but it seems that the term partimento was more or less coined in Naples. So that's the first thing. Um, yes, the difference between basso continuo and partimento is, of course, that basso continuo is mostly referred to as a term for accompaniment in instrumental music, in sacred music, in opera, and so on. There's always a singer or a flute player or a violin player or whatever. In partimento, it's a solo player, so you have to you see it as exercises where the task is to imagine the voices or the lines over a bass. You have a bass, you have figures, and you have to imagine the lines over the bass. So it is, in that sense, it is not chordal playing, but rather playing counterpoint.
So would it be fair to say
And that
you're not doing it correctly if you're playing chords? I mean, even if you're a beginner, is that wrong, or is that a good start? What would you say to that?
yeah, well, for me, it is important to listen to the terms they use to see how do they talk about things. So what words do they use? And they do not talk about harmony, but they talk about counterpoint. So learning music was called you learn counterpoint. And so counterpoint was almost synonymous with composition. Um, so the whole idea of linearity was so self-evident that it was hardly even discussed. Of course, you can find exercises such as the rule of the octave. You can find exercises where the figures really show that the students were playing like chords from note to note. And that was, of course, maybe a step in an evolution towards playing more linear counterpoint. I think that's fair to say.
Okay. So I guess the next question before we tackle the meat of the interview is, was he a Durantist, Cotumacci, or was he more of the Leo tradition? Or was he perhaps something in the middle?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Um, if you see how Cotumacci was received in the early 19th century, there is a kind of revival of Cotumacci pedagogy in the 1810s, 20s. And I think the reason for that is that he was he was connected both to the Durantists, the Durante school, but he had also the skills of the Leo school. So he was also schooled in old counterpoint. So in that sense, Rosa Cafiero has written an article about placing Cotomacci as a kind of middle ground figure between the school of Leo and the school of Durante. However, I think that if you look at his pedagogy in the 1750s when he started to teach, I would say he is more clearly a Durantist proponent than a Laist proponent, because his pedagogy is very clearly adapted to the school where he got his job at the Onofrio. So I would say he's a clear Durantist in his approach and his teaching, although he was very, very well schooled in old counterpoint.
Now, this might be a silly question, but of the four conservatories, was any one of them regarded as perhaps the best out of the four? Was there any, or were they all considered equal?
It depends on who you would ask. Those who would strive to become a composer in opera or dramatic music, they would probably point at the Loreto and the Onofrio as the best ones for that purpose. If you would like to become a good composer of church music, the answer was almost certainly the Turchini or the Pietà, which was specialized in church music. So a little bit depending on the purpose where you were heading as
Was
a
there
young
a
student.
biggest one, like it had the most teachers, the most students, but just by sheer size, was any one of them like the most big conservatory, or they were all relatively similar?
Yeah, so there are some numbers in how many students that were in these schools, but um, it is generally thought that these numbers are a bit exaggerated. They talk about 300 boys or 200
Yeah.
boys, and it seems that the real number was probably somewhat lower. No, they were all more or less equal in size.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't believe that Rosa Kafira is writing these articles in the 90s, 1993.
Yes,
I mean, just incredible that just really these kind of heroic figures are just trying to revive this really special pedagogy. And I hope we can really spread the word on this scholarship and continue this scholarship. And so I think it's just really nice to just see that there was a history going to the 90s, the 80s, people still trying to talk about Partimento, and there was still interest in it. And now, of course, everyone's interested in Partimento, which is really great. So maybe we should talk about the book now. Do you want to? Here's just the cover of it. I think people should see it. This is what they'll
yes.
see. They can buy it at Westman. So there's 2 volumes. Could you just talk about the 2 volumes first?
Yeah, so the 50 lessons are the easiest pieces. So these are in volume 1, and at the end of this volume, I did the same thing as with my Mattei volume, in which I added a workbook section, and that means that I put like ordinary piano scores where you can sketch your own realizations. So this is very helpful for teaching situations. If you do things in a class, you can let students sketch their ideas and you can comment on them.
Could you talk a little bit about
Uh,
you said they're easy lessons. So easy is relative to different people. So could you give a brief idea of the lessons?
yeah, so I should maybe say the easiest ones. Um, they are complicated in one way because of the system he uses in teaching. I will tell a little bit more about that. But they are relatively short. So most of these exercises are like 20 measures or so. So they're relatively short, which is a good thing in Partimento, because often when the pieces become very long, the imitation thing becomes difficult because it's so much to remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the short pieces are often very good to start with. That's why in my own teaching I use these very short pieces by Stanislao Mattei. They are only 5 or 6 measures. They're really good for teaching. So the shortest one are often the best ones in the beginning.
Okay, so yeah, let's dive into his pedagogy. How does this man teach? Like, what? How is he like different from a Fenaroli, and what's his style? And if he has a brand new student, what does he put that student through?
Yeah, so I made a few slides. We could look at them.
Okay,
Um,
so
one
you
of the
put here
things that
unfigured bass. What does that mean?
yeah, so that's what
Underfigured bass. I mean,
Cotumacci. So everybody knows about figure bass. So you have like a bass line, and
yeah.
you put numbers over it, and you see at least the dots in the line. So you have to combine these
Mm.
dots to linear, a top melody and a middle voice. Um, Most of you have also heard the word unfigured bass. So when
Yeah.
the figures are missing, you have to imagine yourself where are the modulations, and often the rule of the octave is used to solve these puzzles. When you have a short, like the Furno pieces, they are entirely unfigured, and you have to use the rule of the octave to solve it. Well, underfigured bass is a term that I think is good to use in the case of Cotumacci, because what Cotumacci does is that he deliberately um, omits certain information from the figures. So they are not unfigured, but they are not figured either. And for example, in most of the 50 lessons in Volume 1, he restrains from using any accidentals in the figures,
Hmm.
which is very strange, even though, I mean, it's obvious for everyone that accidentals are played, because otherwise it would sound very strange. So they are played, but they are not notated. Yeah. So in the beginning, when I was reading these pieces, I was thinking, do we have to do with a bad copyist here? You start to doubt on the quality of the collection. Is this really Can this really be correct? But now when I found this autograph, I was that was a great moment, because I could see, this is deliberately done. These are
Hmm.
no mistakes. This is really part of his pedagogy. And so
Could we see an example of that? What do you mean by underfigured? Maybe we should see something that represents that.
I have a few slides. We'll come to that. I will have a few slides to show in the
Okay.
beginning, just to show the different styles of partimento. So you can. I just took a few photos from various manuscripts, just to show what you see. Yeah, so if we take the next slide, we see a typical start of the school of Durante. What you see here is typical, because Durante starts with cadences. So you
Yeah.
have bom bom bom, a simple cadential formula, and it is then repeated in new keys. In this case, it's interesting to see that um, he extends the cadence. So there's a pom pom pom, and then pom 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 pom, and then pom 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 pom, and then pom 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 pom, like that.
Mm.
And so they become slightly more extended. So a little bit more to memorize, and a little bit more to also to connect with the previous exercise.
Mm.
So this is you can and the length of these is always the same. So you can use the skills you learned in the G major version and apply it into the next key. Yeah, so it is you can almost see that this was used for imitation and variation. Yeah? And the approach here in teaching is the elementary approach. So you start with small building blocks like cadences, scales, and then sequences. Now, this is not the same approach as what you see in the easiest pieces of the school of Leo, which was the opposite, or the rivaling school in Naples. So this was the trajectory towards opera, where you had to become flexible as an accompanist, and where you had to make modulations and so on. So you had to be a good accompanist for the opera. In the case of the Leo school, it was more directed towards church music. So what you see in the Leo school is more that you find easy partimenti that are built on themes. So if we look at the next slide, you see the school of Leo. If you see how this starts, this is really a theme. Up, down, bum, as I see. Dum, bum, bum, bim, bum. Ba-di-da-dum, ba-da-dim, bum. So there's a theme and a counter subject, and you have to memorize the theme and the counter subject, and you have to understand the double counterpoint of it, and to when there's the counter subject is coming, you have to place the theme over it, and vice versa. And so this is not built on like elements. It's not an elementary approach, but rather a thematic approach. And this you see in Sala, you see this in Caffaro, you see this in Leo's pieces, you see this in Trito's pieces. It is very clear that this is connected with the style of contrapuntal teaching, which is really built from themes. Yeah, so the connection between partimento and counterpoint is a strong one. No? We could go to the next slide. We go back to the school of Durante. You see here the continuation of what we saw previously. And you see here on the top line typical sequential patterns. You see 7-7-7-7, you see? Pom, 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 that kind of things. And on the top of this page, you can see the scales. Yeah, so all three elements you can see already in these two pages. So the cadences, the scales, and the sequences. Now, often this is like 50 pages of this kind of stuff. You really do this very thoroughly, and maybe they worked a year or so on all these patterns, and they varied them in all kinds of situations and in all keys until they could start to put them together. So if we take the next slide, you see the moment where you go from the elements on the top line to the first partimento, and then it says lezioni facili. So the simplest lessons to start to play. I can't read it; it's very small. Small here. But you actually the element in the top line is actually repeated in the second line. You see that 2-4, and that 2-4 is used at the start of the. So it's really connected. So the elements you train them first one by one, and then you put them together. These elements are combined, and they make small pieces out of it. You see this in Durante, you see this in Fenaroli, you see this in Paisiello. All these Durantist masters have this same elementary approach. Okay, so this is interesting to see the difference in the pedagogy in these materials.
And this is the easy stuff, right? This is the 50 pages. Are these the 50 lessons?
No. This is just an example from I don't know the author here, but I think it is maybe from the 1740s or so, maybe a decade or two before Cotumacci.
Okay.
So we could go to the next slide. I just made a little list of the elements that you can expect in this Durantist approach. Often they start with the preparation of the fourth. So they make small cadences where you prepare the fourth in a cadence. And then you do the same thing, the ways to prepare the seventh, and then the ninth, and then you do the cadenza doppia. Okay, so all these, it is almost like a curriculum to learn the entire set of figures. And so the figured bass, you do it systematically with small units that
I
are
have a
learned by
question.
ear.
I have a question, Professor Ventura. So it really has to do with progression. If you go to partimenti.org, it's you have the Joseph Dole Partimenti Regole. You have a Regole of Paisiello, a Fenroli, of course. Is it important? This Durante element. So basically, if you're teaching Partimento, do you follow that cadences first, rule of the octave, and then preparing dissonances, and then moti del basso? Is it typically that's how they always taught? At least for the Durante sort of way.
Yes. So sometimes there is so some maestri can do the cadenza doppia before the 4 and the 7 and the 9. So there are differences in the order, but more or less, it's more or less the same in the school of Durante. Yes.
Okay. So
Absolutely.
so if you were doing a curriculum, and I'm always obsessed with trying to see what is the best way to teach someone. I mean, because if they had a systematic way in teaching Partimento, I want to know everything about the actual way that they did it. Yeah, that's really because it's like the magic dust, really, essentially. Like because it's in some ways the information is one thing, but it's the delivery model that really is really exciting. It's how did one thing lead to another, and was it really important that you master one thing first, or do you kind of go through it and it sort of builds, you kind of introduce elements? So that's really, I'm curious. And do you see that in Cotumacci? What does he have, a sort of sequential, progressive build up with these elements?
Yeah, well, I think the Durante is more clearly progressively ordered than Cotumacci. Cotumacci has this written introduction, which I received a beautiful translation by Massimo Redelli, who helped me to translate it beautifully into English. But so he explains some of the basic rules before he starts to do the playing and the imitation. But some general things about the efficiency of teaching. What you can see is that they normally start with very short elements in the beginning, so like 2 bars or 3 bars, and then they extend it to 4 bars, so a little bit more to memorize. And another thing which is essential for the pedagogy here is that if you have one cadence, you give that cadence not once or twice, but like 7 or 8 or 9 times, and from different in different keys. And in the beginning, I didn't really understand that, because I was wondering, why do they write everything like 10 times as if they were stupid? Because the figures were the same. And so you would understand that after 2 times. You don't need to write it 10 times.
Yeah.
And the solution to this problem I got by looking at the counterpoint notebooks, because in the counterpoint notebooks, you could see that they did exactly the same there. And so they wrote the same cadential patterns, but they wrote variations. And from that, you can draw the conclusion, that's why they write them 9 times or so. Because every time they got a new one, they would do a little variation. It's, of course, the same pedagogy as you can see in the written counterpoint.
Yeah.
And moreover, it was also the same partimenti that were played in the very beginning. They reappeared in the counterpoint notebooks. So you saw that they actually were working with the same materials.
Yeah.
So I was quite shocked to see, this is a partimento here in the bass. I didn't realize that there were partimenti in the counterpoint notebooks, but there were. And that showed that how strongly these materials are connected in the pedagogy.
I really believe that you can't really lecture someone rules because it's so hard to get in the brain if you just say remember this, and it really is helpful and probably the only way, I mean, to do an exercise that employs the information and do it in
Yes.
the Don Drieu is the French book is something like that, because in a way it does the same thing in different keys. So you're saying, so you can see this thinking right in the exercises for Cotumacci. He's
Yeah,
repeating seven. He wants you to do the exercise and to get your hands working, doing these particular elemental lessons, essentially.
absolutely. It is the same with all these maestri. They work very practically, and they work with imitation and with variation. The variation is very, very important. You can't see it immediately, but you can see it from counterpoint books. That's what's going on.
Fantastic.
Okay, we could take the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting page because this is the very start of when Durante is ready with everything. He has done the fourth and the seventh and the ninth and all the sequences and so on. So the whole figured bass curriculum is ready now, and it is as if Durante then wipes everything from the table and says, "Okay, let's start all over again." And so he starts from the very beginning. This is the very start of the more advanced course. And what you see here is that the figures are gone, right? So here you have to start to imagine, okay, if this is pa da 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 dim pa di di pa da da di yum pa di di pa da da di dum. So you have to connect the first in each group of four, and then understand, aha, this is a cadence. Ya da da di. Ah, this is the next one. And then you find the contrapuntal patterns by just listening. Yeah? And you see the same phenomenon in the next slide with the start of the same situation in Fenaroli. You see, this is the very start of Fenaroli's book 4, which is also the point where the figures are ready and done. And then you jump into the more advanced course where you start with unfigured bass. Yeah? So he has an entire book of unfigured bass where it is as if you repeat everything you've done in figured bass, but now you have to understand what, if there would have been figures, which figures would have been there. That's the question. Can you understand what figures to expect here? And
Now,
if you know what to expect, then you can play it.
Professor Ventur, I have a question just to jump in here. Did you look at Cotumacci's solfeggio manuscript that Professor Nicholas Baragwanath is he's using quite extensively? And do you see? You talked about partimento and counterpoint. There's clear connections there. So he taught solfeggio. Is there any relation here that you can see that's useful? Maybe with the counterpoint manuscript and the solfeggio.
Yeah, this is also a very good question. So the solfeggi in the school of Durante, they look a bit old-fashioned, which is a bit paradoxical because in Partimento you would say that the modern school is the Durante school. So you would expect the solfeggi to be modern, but they are not. They are old-fashioned. And in the school of Leo, the counterpoint is old-fashioned because they were doing church music. But the solfeggi are actually quite modern. They are more operatic and they're more aria-style solfeggi. And most of them are aria-style solfeggi, although there are several like solfeggi fugati also in the school of Leo. So there is a kind of a complementarity between the solfeggi and the and the partimenti. So what they did not do in partimento, they compensated for in the solfeggi, and I think that's true for Cotumacci too.
Okay, so let's carry on here. So let's look at the next slide that you prepared.
Yeah.
This
So
is
this is Cotumacci. You see,
Cotumacci
also this
himself.
is
Yeah.
the start of the second book. Also the same phenomenon with entirely unfigured lessons. You see that, or very scarcely figured, maybe just one figure in the whole piece.
Yeah.
There's almost nothing. So
Do
you
you
really
have?
see the link between
Yeah.
Durante, Fenaroli, Cotumacci. They have the same system. First, you do all the figures, and then you wipe everything from the table, as Maestro Durante had shown, and then you start all over again with unfigured base.
Yeah.
Yeah? Now I come to what is essential for Cotumacci, and that will be on the next slide. Here we have the autograph. And we could take a look at the number 6 on the bottom of the page.
Oh, like this?
Yeah. So yes, perfect. So this one is one in E minor. You see that the rhythmical variety is not very great. It looks a little bit boring rhythmically,
Looks like Furno.
and I think it looked like Furno exactly. And Cotumacci was the teacher of Furno, right?
Really? Okay.
So what he was. So Furno really learned this idea from Cotumacci, and what I only understood, learned to understand recently with Furno is that this is all deliberately done, because if you restrain from adding any figures, you have to draw your conclusions only from pitches. Yeah, so the rhythms would reveal information about where the cadences are that you don't want to show. So you make them deliberately boring because the student has to learn which patterns are like implying what kind of prepared dissonances.
So
And
you're
so if
saying
you
this
have
is
this
a
pattern,
pedagogical choice then by the teacher.
absolutely, yes, absolutely. So if you see here, this is in E minor, so it starts with a cadence, like that. And then you have 6/4, and then it says 5/3. Of course, this should not be minor. When I play 5/3, it should not be minor, it should be major. Right? So what Cotumacci is missing is he doesn't write any accidentals. The 3 should have had a sharp, because it should be a major chord on the dominant back to E minor. But he doesn't do
Does he
that.
put any accidentals, like even on the 6/4 2 chord, 6/4 3 chord? No, nothing.
Nothing in the entire first book. I think there are 1 or 2. So in like 99% of the cases, he deliberately omits the figures, the accidentals from the figures, right? And it means that you have to understand yourself what is going on. Is Cotumacci steering us to a new key? Is he modulating? Then we should understand how to do that. Where is the point where we should insert the new notes for the new key? And so if I would play on and see where is the point where Cotumacci reaches his first new key, well, it's just following the pattern in the beginning. Tom, pom, pom, pidim, pom. So can I find this pattern anywhere? Yeah, so if I go to bar 4, yeah, a little bit disguised in the middle of bar 4, you find this same pattern, but now in B minor. Yum pa dee da dee dee pom pom pom, like that. Okay, so this is the point. The B minor point in the middle of bar 4 is the point where you should have modulated. Yeah? But the figures do not reveal any information of where to do it. And that is, of course, deliberately done by Cotumacci because he wants you to understand yourself. What is the best point to do it? Okay, so if I would do that, okay, this is just returning back. Yeah, you are still in E minor. You are still in E minor. Now something must happen. Now, what are the figures there? He puts 642 after the E. If I would play 642, it would not be good. That's not the one you should have, because it should have a sharpened 4 because you modulate. Yeah, so if you modulate, you need to have a sharp 4. So it is as if Cotumacci asked the students, what do you think we should have? Should we have 642 or should we have 6 sharp 42?
Now, as a
And
teacher,
if you don't,
that is this a great thing? I mean, it could be dangerous, but but you feel like it's such a great tool to employ to make your student think on the spot.
yes, absolutely. So what he teaches is actually analytical reading. We would call it analytical reading today. You have to understand what you read. So it's not enough to just play and say, "It sounds good." You have to understand what you're doing. Yeah? And if you don't understand what you see, then it won't sound properly. You can hear
Right.
the thoughts. You didn't understand that you were modulating. Aha, okay. Try once again. We are modulating. Please do it properly. Right? So it's very smart.
So this is what you really mean by underfigured bass. You have the figures, but you
Exactly.
leave out some, so you could say, critical information relating to the key,
Yes.
relating to modulations and cadences, that you intend your student to really look at the half information and really get it from there. And this is
Yeah.
intermediary before all the figures are gone.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So and they become very complicated at the end of the second book too. So he has very difficult pieces with fugues and everything. I just want to say one more thing about the E minor piece,
Okay.
which is very interesting. The last line, if you look where we're heading, the last line, I just play it once. Oh, sorry, I have to go to the cadence in the middle of the next to last line,
Okay.
the C major. Now I will play the bass from C major.
Okay.
Listen here. Then the theme comes back. The confirmation of the main key. So this is really a sequential pattern, right? And this is what we in modern music theory would call tonicizations. So you have several points where you're reaching. You confirm a temporary key. Now, all that information is also missing here. It's just a line, but you have to understand, this is a sequential pattern where you have to tonicize every temporary key in order to make sense of it. Otherwise, it would sound really strange. So this is also something that you can see in many of Cotumacci's pieces. You have to understand what you read.
Okay, so what is this? Oh, this is the same thing.
The same piece.
Okay, but you okay. You
It's the
typed it out.
transcription.
Okay, this one.
We could end off with this one. Here I have recorded a version of this B minor piece. This is one of the first books. Is it possible to play it?
I think so.
Yeah.
Let me see if anything happens. Beautiful.
Yeah, so
that's great.
You can hear the old style. It's very linear. It's almost like a trio sonata.
It's gorgeous.
Style.
That was wonderful. So this is a Cotumacci partimento that you realized.
Yes.
Wonderful.
It's the lesson number 43 here. So it's at
this
the
is
very
from the
end of.
Is that book 2?
For the first book.
Oh, so it's already
No,
quite.
this is book 1.
Yeah, quite. It's got stuff in it. That's quite. That first 50 is, as you said, what about the second book then?
Yeah, so he uses the term partimenti for the second set, and they are more advanced. In the beginning, they are unfigured, but at the end, they are highly figured, and there are, I think, 9 huge partimento fugues among these 75 pieces in the second book. And they're really complicated. So it's I think most will probably use, especially the first book, because they are easier pieces to start with, and you learn like step by step. The second book is more art pieces. You could almost play them on concerts.
Could you like we say difficult, comparable to Fenaroli book 5, 6, 4, something like that?
Yeah, I think they are among the most difficult pieces in the repertoire. At least the end of the book.
Yeah.
It's very jumpy, so it's challenging for an accomplished player. Will have difficulties to grab everything.
So wait, so 75 partimenti, and so they're meant. Did he actually teach with these?
He did. So he I have even found partimenti in the counterpoint notebooks from Cotumacci's teaching. So he even used them in written counterpoint studies, which is really fascinating.
Did can you speak of his counterpoint notebooks? Is it students of his that you're talking about?
Exactly, yes. So this is a part of my dissertation. I wrote a chapter about the counterpoint notebooks that I found in Belgium, in Liège. And these are written under Cotumacci's guidance, and you can see the stuff
Okay.
appearing in those lines.
Yeah.
So this is also typical for the Durante school. So he was really a Durantist in his way of teaching, definitely.
Yeah. So, how do you, to end off, Professor Ventura, how will this enrich the Partimento, the modern Partimento approach? I mean, you have Mattei, you have Sala, you of course have
Yeah.
Fenaroli, which is Professor Sanguinetti and Professor Alwalt de Meyer have mentioned. How will this, and I know Professor Matteo Masori has talked about Ristori and Saratelli and
Yeah.
Martini. You worked on the Martini. So
Yeah.
how would a
I
modern
see.
teacher where do you see these collections being used?
Yeah, I think the modern pedagogue will find his and her way in this repertoire, and I have my favorite spots to start and where to go. Um, have all their own qualities. I should mention also that I'm almost ready with the first volume of my forthcoming Durante edition. So Durante will come out in within a month or so,
Oh wow!
um,
You
and
should come
Durante is
back,
actually
come back for that. That'd be great.
yeah. So the Durante edition will appear uh, during this year.
Okay,
Everything will be ready by Christmas.
could you just briefly talk about how does Kotumachi teach his rules? Is there any major differences with Fenaroli?
No, I don't think so. Maybe he's a little bit more strict with the old style rules with preparations and so on. But no, it's more or less similar, I would say.
Okay,
They're
okay,
about the same time too, so they were just in different schools. But
yeah.
Fenaroli was at Loreto and Cotumacci was at Onofrio.
So if we go to partimenti.org, there is the let me just go here. So people are aware of if you go to there's I think the diminuiti, right, and the where is this Durante here. He's got
Yes.
are these rules by his collected by his students and kind of put together as like a collection of all the different rules, or is it by his hand? So can you give us a little idea of what to look forward to also when your edition comes out?
Yeah. So Durante is one of the most difficult situations in terms of sources. I think there are 52 sources now of Durante.
Wow.
Uh, so the situation is extremely difficult and varied, and some sources show some parts of Durante's teaching at the very beginning of his teaching, and then things develop and were copied and copied again and copied again. So um, yeah, so you have to choose what source to follow. It is impossible to collect everything in one edition because it would take my whole life
Really
to
that
make
bad?
that edition. So it has already taken a lot of time, but now I what I will do now in the first volume will be the Regole and the pieces that come from the Regole, so the combinations of the patterns, and there will be 38 of them. And then in the second book, there will be the diminuiti and the imitative pieces. And you can see that there is a flow from category to category. So there are no strict lines from category one to category two. It's really flowing into each other.
Would
So
you
that's
say Fenaroli sort of? Um so like Fenaroli is a Durante student, right? If I'm not mistaken,
yes,
is that right?
absolutely.
So would he? And he is like a master teacher, so he really is a really known for teaching. Would you say, looking at your edition and Fenaroli's rules, there's a sort of continuity there?
Absolutely. It's more or less the same. Although
Really? Okay.
I think that if you hear the Durante pieces, you notice that Durante is the better composer of the two.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. You see, like small. It's a bit like Haydn. He surprises things in cadences. He makes a double cadence and have a short, quick modulation to an unexpected key and that kind of things. So it's marvelously composed. The
Mm,
music is so good. It's inspired music.
yeah.
The Fenaroli, I think, sometimes is a bit dry compared
Mm,
to Durante, I would
mm,
say,
great.
but very
Well,
pedagogically very good. I mean,
mm.
it's very stepwise and structured. Fenaroli.
Well, Professor Ventura, I guess it's episode 5 or 6 that you've come on, and I guess it's going to be 7 or 8 when you come back with for the Durante edition. And
We'll see.
but yeah, we need to do this because we need to spread the word of this great pedagogy, this great style of teaching, this historical, truly historical heritage that really was handed down to us through manuscripts, through archival materials, and really deserves a revival or restoration. So I applaud you. As always, you're always welcome to come on the show. And yeah, please let's get the Durante one on. Honestly, the audience was really excited for this interview. So anything, you're a top scholar, so we appreciate anything that you have to say. Final words?
Now, I would just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about these things. I mean, it's always a little journey to make these additions. You find the source and should I do this? How much time will it take? And and you start working on it. And it's so nice also to be in contact with lots of people all around the world who are now using these pieces and send their realizations in the Art of Partimento Facebook group,
Mm.
and people are commenting. It's really fun to see how the digital age really takes care of this kind of pedagogy. It's really
I can
nice.
speak for maybe a bunch of people who think that's it's always great when a scholar is able to give more information, sharpen our knowledge of really particular things. And I can just end with one final thing. Are you uh, non-partimental aligned colleagues in music education? Are you seeing more people curious about it? Have people? I mean, I guess definitely since 2019, lots of increasing. There's big conferences coming up. Anything on any changes you've seen recently? That any things worthy of
So
note?
absolutely. I mean, in Oslo, I was 3 years, and I started a little group with people who started to do Partimento, and there is now a university course there. Now in the autumn here, I will start a course in Partimento in Örebro at the university, and I heard today that there are some 25 students starting an online course. That would be really fascinating. So, absolutely, there is a great interest. Many church music musicians are interested in learning like improvisation in more historical ways than what they have learned in their education.
Oh,
So,
I just there's one thing I forgot. I know you got to go, but I just want to ask you this. Okay, so I was just talking to a friend, and he was just saying like, J.S. Bach, the greatest composer of all time, better than CPE, better than his son JC. I know, all right, sure. But I was just thinking to myself, when we throw out best and all of this, I mean, have we really looked at everything that's been published or maybe not published and made a decision? Because you told me something really astounding. I mean, pretty recently you said something like Padre Giambattista Martini, Padre Martini. Isn't it true that the greater corpus of his work is just in manuscript and unpublished, and like there's
Yes.
and maybe and if him there's maybe other Italian composers or all sorts of people who are just languishing in archives.
Yes, absolutely. I just have to mention one thing. If you look at Leonardo Leo, if you hear his piece, every time you hear a piece performed by Leonardo Leo, people are asking, "What? Why is this not? Why is this not published? Why is it not on CD? You know, it's still in manuscript. It's a composer comparable with the. I mean, I ranking as high as Johann Sebastian Bach. There's not even a complete edition of Leo's masses. I mean, it's a scandal. It's a scandal.
Wait, okay, but there was
No,
someone who told me something. Martini did something, or was it
yes,
Spanish composers? I don't know. Somebody told me that somebody did something that Bach didn't do. So that's what got me intrigued. It got me intrigued. It was either Spanish old Renaissance people or it was Martini. I don't remember, but somebody did something that Bach didn't do.
I was thinking that the Neapolitans, they always go up to 4 parts.
Yeah.
Okay, so they counterpoint in 2 parts, 3 parts, 4 parts, and then they start composing like masses and dixits and solo motets and so on. And in Bologna, the Martini, he goes from 2 part, 3 part, 4 part, 5 part, 6 part, 7 part, 8 part. Okay, so he has a longer trajectory of counterpoint.
Yeah. And you're saying a lot of his stuff is not published.
Yes, absolutely.
Incredible. Yeah. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, well, please, I hope performers and people who are that this is it. I mean, please record more and more of that stuff. I really will. The world needs to hear to revive this. I mean, it's like during the Renaissance, they had all these Greek from Constantinople, right? They had all these manuscripts coming into Italy and that sort of thing. So it's like we have all these Italian music and music in these Naples conservatories and Martini that we really would love to hear published. Like I know Giovanna Barbati was doing cello work, Cipriani and that sort of thing. So let's keep that going because more unpublished works. I think it would at least change the perception of what classical music. I mean, for instance, Vivaldi, right? I mean, wasn't Vivaldi like in languishing in oblivion, total obscurity until relatively recently, and then there was a huge Vivaldi revival, and that's just one composer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot to discover still.
Yeah. Great. Well, the great Professor Peter Van Toor. Well, I'm booking you preemptively for the Durantes, so we'll see you again, I guess, relatively shortly. But thank you for today's episode on Cotumacci, and I'll talk to you soon.
No, thank you so much for the privilege, Nikhil.